Mason Holloway believed he'd escaped the turmoil of city life for the quiet solace of the woods, until one morning, a stern HOA official slapped him with a $5,000 fine for hunting on the very land his ancestors had bequeathed him. Those who wore the badge of community service had no inkling that Mason hadn't merely inherited his father's Remington shotgun. He'd inherited the entire forest they were scheming to seize. If they wanted a war, he was prepared to show them exactly how one was fought, and won, beneath the canopy of pines and maples. Mason Holloway slid open his cabin's creaking door to the symphony of dawn, wind rustling through fir needles, the distant honk of a loon, and, on this particular morning, the scrub of scuffed shoes on his front stoop. He raised his rifle-coated shoulder and stepped onto the weathered porch where a woman in crisp business attire stood, clipboard in hand. Her gaze drilled into him like the bore of his Remington. "Mason Holloway?" she asked, voice precise as a scalpel. He set down his coffee and nodded. "That's me. Can I help you?" She extended a laminated notice. "I'm Evelyn Richardson, chair of the Green Valley Homeowners Association. You're cited for unauthorized hunting that disrupted the community. Article 4, Section 12 of our Green Living Charter. Fine. $5,000. Mason glanced at the paper, blinked twice, and laughed, soft, disbelieving laughter. $5,000? I was hunting miles from any homes. I have all the proper permits. Evelyn's lips curved into a thin smile. We manage the connected trails. Your rifle reports registered 3 shots in the past 2 weeks. Residents complained of startled children. If you don't comply, legal action follows. He lowered his eyes to the notice's bold red stamp, Level 1 infraction. He closed his hand over it. This forest is private property, he said quietly. But it's part of our community easement, she countered, clipboard tapping as though forging an iron link. Please reconsider how you coexist with neighbors. Without another word, she turned on silent heels and strode down the steps, leaving Mason leaning against the doorframe, the morning chill mingling with disbelief. $5,000, for hunting on his own land. 3 days later, Mason received an ornate invitation to the unveiling of Halcyon Springs Eco Park, a new HOA project. Curiosity and ire mingled in his veins. He slipped into his truck and drove to the local recreation center, the same building where he'd once volunteered to repair the scoreboard. Inside, dozens of residents filled folding chairs. A projector cast crisp renderings of lotus ponds, yoga clearings, and wooden boardwalks through mossy groves. At the podium, Evelyn stood impeccable in a tailored suit. "Welcome to Halcyon Springs," she announced in a tone sweet as honey-coated steel, Green Valley's sanctuary for soul and soil. Applause rippled through the crowd like a slow wave. Mason remained seated, arms crossed over his chest. The name Halcyon Springs knotted his stomach, too close to Callahan. An elderly man beside Mason whispered, "That forest used to be private land, Callahan Forest. Belonged to the Callahan family for generations." Mason's breath caught. "Callahan?" The man nodded. "Family sold off bits in the 80s. That HOA moved in after." The hidden history stabbed Mason deeper than any groin shot. Callahan, his great-grandfather Charles Callahan had indeed homesteaded that land after World War I, felling timber by hand, raising deer, and building the Holloway Callahan estate. When the meeting adjourned, Mason slipped away into late afternoon gloom, mind alive with the rediscovered name. Back at his cabin, he unearthed dusty trunks stacked beneath the shed. Amid yellowed letters and faded photographs lay a hand-drawn map inscribed, Charles Callahan, Timber Hollow Estate. His pulse thundered as he matched the jagged boundary lines against Monroe County's digital map on his laptop. It was the identical forest, Halcyon Springs was Timber Hollow, and Timber Hollow had always belonged to the Callahan-Holloway line. Mason leaned back in his chair, the map crinkling beneath him. This was no simple infraction. It was ancestral theft. He felt the first cold spike of resolve. He would not merely pay or comply, he would fight. The gentle hush of wind outside the window seemed to underscore his oath. That night, sleep eluded him. He drafted a plan of attack, gather irrefutable proof of his land's title, unearth the forged HOA documents, and expose every conspirator, from Evelyn on down. Justice would be done under his trees, by his rules, in the forest his blood had tamed. Dawn's slate-gray light found Mason perched at his kitchen table, surrounded by yellow deed books, sepia-toned photographs, and fragments of hand-scribbled maps. His smartphone's flashlight traced the fragile ink of the old Callahan map as he compared it to the county's online parcels. Every contour matched. He drove into Monroe County's Office of Maps and Planning, craving confirmation. Inside, Marta Reynolds, a bespectacled archivist in her 60s, lifted the Callahan map as though it were a living relic. "We seldom see one this clear," she commented, voice hushed in reverence. "Where did you find it?" "In a chest under my cabin's shed," Mason replied. He slid his grandfather's inheritance papers across the counter. Deeds, wills, tax records, all pointing to the same conclusion. Then he summoned a current zoning map, which labeled the forest, Halcyon Springs Community Nature Preserve. No record indicated a lawful transfer from the Callahan-Holloway lineage. Marta scrolled through her database. "Most HOA easements are recorded here. But I see only this dubious 1999 transfer. From one Walter Green to Halcyon Ridge HOA." She scowled. "I have no record of any Walter Green owning this parcel before 1999. The hairs on Mason's neck prickled. "Let me see that transfer document." He recognized the signature immediately, so familiar it made his stomach roll. Her father, Mason Roy Holloway. He retrieved the Holloway family's original will and scanned the signature. It matched the forged script on the 1999 deed. Marta's lips parted. "That's clear forgery," she murmured. "And whoever recorded it must have colluded with someone here." Mason pressed for every related record, scanned deeds, notarization logs, chain of title backups. Marta led him to a dimly lit basement where microfiche machines hummed. Together, they unearthed a 1999 notarization slip bearing the name Harold M. Dixon, a county notary public who had retired in 2008. Mason's mind raced. The HOA had manufactured a pseudonym, Walter Green, slipped it into county records, then used forged Holloway signatures to mask the deed. The betrayal was personal and vast. That afternoon, Mason tracked down Harper Dixon at a ramshackle bungalow in Oak Ridge, 45 minutes south. He left a concise note identifying himself as Charles Callahan's grandson and requesting a meeting about the Callahan deed notarizations. 3 days later, a gruff voice crackled over Mason's phone. "Are you Mason Holloway?" "Speaking," he said. "I'm Harold Dixon," the voice rasped. "Meet me at the old diner on Route 12. Alone." Mason's pulse thrummed, but he complied. At the diner, Dixon sat in a corner booth, whisked milkshake in hand. Age had bent him, but his eyes glowed with residual steel. "You're right," Dixon said, lowering his voice. "I didn't notarize any deed for a Walter Green. That name's one I never saw till the HOA dropped it on my desk." He tapped Mason's copy of the 1999 deed. "They sent me a file to stamp, said it was routine. I did as instructed. And then, well, things got messy." Mason leaned in. "Why come forward now?" Dixon's gaze flicked to the window. "Every time I started asking questions, something bad happened. IRS audits, business sabotage, my house burned down. They had friends in high places. But they never got to me. I kept original scans of every deed I notarized, just in case." He pressed a zipped plastic bag onto the table. Inside, a USB drive. Mason accepted it carefully. "Thank you." Dixon inhaled raggedly. "Your granddad Vernon, he was my oldest friend. He always said the land stayed in the family. Do right by him." That night, Mason booted his laptop and plugged in the drive. 3 folders popped up. Scanned _deeds, chain _of title, and unfiled _objections. A final text file, testimony _in case of disappearance, blinked ominously. He closed the laptop. He wasn't alone anymore. Back at home, he spread the evidence across his dining table. Calloused notary logs, forged signatures, untraceable corporate filings. He glanced at Elise, his wife, who had once built her career as a crisis communications strategist for a Fortune 100 firm before they'd both fled to Green Valley. She studied the documents in silence, then lifted her gaze. "This isn't just about hunting fines," she said softly. "It's a conspiracy. Forged deeds, fraudulent notary, HOA collusion. They're stealing your inheritance and rewriting history." Mason nodded grimly. "Tomorrow, we go public." The next morning, Mason and Elise made a silent pact. They would dismantle the HOA's scheme one forged document at a time. Their first step was to enlist legal counsel. Mason reopened the tattered pages of his grandfather's files, retrieved Gregory McAllister's card from the bottom of a desk drawer, and drove to McAllister and Price Law offices. Gregory McAllister, 58, sported silver-framed glasses and a receding hairline. Once his father's best friend, Gregory had drifted into representing whoever paid best, including HOA interests. Mason found him in a cluttered office of leather-bound volumes and evidence boxes. "Gregory," Mason began, placing envelopes before him. Inside, scanned deeds proving forgery, Dixon's notarization logs, and Marta's research notes. Gregory's expression clouded as he examined the proof. "I represent several HOA board members," Gregory said, voice tight. "This evidence implicates Evelyn Richardson, Trevor Adams, and others. Why bring it to me?" Mason leveled his gaze. "Because you know the HOA's inner workings. You can expedite a lawsuit, and if you don't act, you'll be complicit." Gregory stared at the forged signatures. "If true, this is financial fraud, deed falsification, felony territory." He paused, then met Mason's eyes. "All right, I'll represent you, on one condition. My name stays off the record until filing." Mason nodded. "Deal." Meanwhile, Elise drafted a social media campaign on ValleyNet, Green Valley's local platform. She posted a polite query, seeking volunteers. Cross-reference land titles for Halcyon Springs. Anyone with archival access? Within 40 minutes, responses flooded in: genealogists, retired surveyors, local journalists. That evening, Mason convened his newfound allies in his cabin's great room. Marta, Gregory, discreetly via phone, Diane Callahan, a distant cousin, and 2 surveyors. He laid out the falsified deeds, the forged signatures, and the true Callahan Holloway maps. Surveyor Elena Chen displayed a digital overlay showing Timber Hollow's boundaries superimposed on HOA maps. "This entire parcel," she said, "is in your family name since 1950. No public easement exists." Diane Callahan, fragile but resolute, added, "I'll testify on family history and my mother's journals describing timber harvests and hunting grounds." Together, they plotted the legal strategy. File a quiet title suit in Lakewood County Court, secure a temporary restraining order halting any HOA development, and expose the HOA's fraudulent fundraising campaign. Meanwhile, Elise seeded ValleyNet with hints of an impending exposé. HOA documents. Discrepancies discovered. Stay tuned. #Green Valley Truth. Comments erupted. What did they misplace? Is the park legal? Holloway land? The community's curiosity grew into concern. 2 days later, at the grand opening of Halcyon Springs, Evelyn Richardson delivered her polished speech beneath a banner proclaiming, "Green Valley Nature Retreat." Mason slipped through the crowd, red legal folder concealed under his arm. When she declared, "Today we break ground on our sanctuary," Mason stepped forward. "Stop right here," he said, voice carrying. The microphone cut off. Cameras snapped as he raised the restraining order secured that morning. Lakewood County Court Temporary Restraining Order. No alterations of Parcel 05242 until title dispute resolved. The announcement stunned the gathering. Evelyn's face paled. Her volunteers froze mid-litter pick. "This is invalid," she sputtered. Mason held up the forged deed, notarization logs, and witness affidavits. The HOA submitted falsified documents to seize Timber Hollow, my ancestral land. And they used your donations under false pretenses. A ripple of outrage spread through the crowd. Reporters moved in. Children tugged parents' hands, asking, "What's happening?" Evelyn shrank back as murmurs rose. Mason's moment of vengeance tasted sweeter than any kill. He turned to the assembled neighbors. "This forest belongs to Holloway descendants. No unauthorized park, no stolen land. I'm calling for an immediate audit of HOA funds and an independent review of all covenants." Voices rang in agreement. "We want answers. Return our money." Evelyn fled backstage, escorted by 2 board members as cameras followed. That night, Mason and Elise retreated to their porch, the moonlight dappling the tree line. "We did it," Elise whispered. Mason exhaled. "This isn't over." Within days, the Lakewood County Court scheduled a hearing on the restraining order and the quiet title action. News outlets covered the saga. Holloway heir versus HOA, fraud allegations rock Green Valley. Evelyn Richardson, Trevor Adams, and Marcus Bennett faced subpoenas for questioning. Their meticulously groomed reputations crumbled under scrutiny. In court, Mason sat flanked by Gregory McAllister, off the record but present, and Diane Callahan. The judge, the Honorable Elena Washburn, who had presided over environmental grant allocations, reviewed reams of evidence: the 1950 Callahan survey, forged deeds, Dixon's notarization logs, and audio recordings of HOA board meetings. Prosecutors presented financial data showing $90,000 raised under false pretenses, funneled through Trevor Adams's architectural firm, Green Vision Consulting. Emails revealed Evelyn's instructions to obscure the Callahan name in grant proposals. Original owners unknown, safe for public development. When it came time for the HOA defendants to speak, Evelyn's polished veneer cracked. Under cross-examination, she admitted ignorance of proper deed transfers and delegated authority to Adams for paperwork, trusting his expertise. Adams, sweating under the bright courtroom lights, invoked legal counsel and declined detailed comment. After 3 tense days, Judge Washburn delivered her verdict. This court finds that the 1999 land transfer was fraudulently recorded, depriving the Holloway descendants of lawful title. The restraining order is affirmed. All HOA activity on the disputed parcel is hereby enjoined. Defendants face further proceedings for financial fraud. The courtroom erupted in whispers and camera flashes. Mason exhaled at last. Justice had been served, but he refused to gloat. Days later, Green Valley hosted a special town hall, this time without any HOA representation. Mason approached the podium, sunlight filtering through stained glass windows. A hush fell. "Friends and neighbors," he began, "I stand here not to fence off the forest, but to heal our community. Timber Hollow, now to be known as the Frank Williams Memorial Preserve, will be managed by an independent nonprofit trust. No gates, no barbed wire, no more forged deeds." He unrolled a fresh map on the lectern, highlighting walking trails, wildlife habitats, and community stewardship areas. "I invite you all to walk these paths, to plant saplings, and to learn our shared history." The crowd responded with applause so thunderous it reverberated against the old gym walls. Sarah Morales, a single mother whose children had once feared stray bullets, stepped forward with her son. "We can't thank you enough," she said, voice trembling. "I want my children to grow up safe here." Over the next months, construction crews repaired aging boardwalks. Volunteers installed educational plaques about local flora and fauna. A scholarship fund, endowed with recovered grant money, supported Green Valley students in environmental law and conservation. On opening day of the Frank Williams Memorial Preserve, Mason and Elise flanked Judge Washburn for the ribbon cutting. A crisp engraved sign read, "Frank Williams Memorial Preserve, in honor of the man who believed in community and sovereignty of the land." Children raced along newly marked trails. Elders lingered under towering cedars. Elise watched Mason with pride as he greeted neighbors, sharing memories of his great-grandfather Charles Callahan and the lessons learned in cybersecurity. That threats might be invisible, but vigilance and community would always bring them to light. In the heart of the forest, Mason paused at a clearing where a single, ancient oak stood sentinel. He traced the bark with his hand, remembering rifle lessons with his father, whispered family legends, and the first slap of the HOA fine that had ignited this battle. He closed his eyes, breathing in the earthy scent of moss and pine. The war he had promised became a journey of restoration, of land, of history, of trust. Beneath these boughs, justice had been reclaimed and a new chapter begun. For Mason Holloway, the woods had never felt more like home.